Welcome everybody coming online. We're just giving the last minute before we start, and then we'll get this program going. Thanks so much for joining. Perfect. Sharp and on the dot. It is 3 p.m. CET and many other times in many other parts of the world, and we will get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Tuesday Raytano, and I am the Managing Director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, and I am extremely pleased to be your host today for the launch of our Global Organised Crime Index 2025 edition. For our incredible 1,000 odd people joining us online, please do note that there is interpretation of all of the material in this broadcast from English into French, Spanish, and Arabic. So please do tune into those channels if it is more comfortable for you. For those of you who don't know us, the Global Initiative is an independent civil society organization, and we are the single largest research and analysis body studying the global illicit economy. This index that we're launching today, we have been publishing biannually since 2021, and it is our flagship product. It benefits from the knowledge and experience of our 800-strong global network of experts, our 150 staff, and hundreds of affiliates working through our 15 regional observatories around the world. The index and its development has been supported since its inception by grants from the governments of the United States, Norway, and the European Union, and we offer our greatest thanks to them, of course, for their trust. Over the next hour, I will be joined by colleagues and distinguished guests who will walk you through some of the key findings of this year's report and help us to reflect on how the index can be used both to analyse and shape our present understanding of this global scourge. But this is only the first of a series of index-related events. Tomorrow, we'll be launching the index at the UN University in Tokyo, an Asia launch that reflects that for the third successive edition, the highest criminality scores have been in Asia. We will also be contributing index-related analysis into the debates taking place on the 15th of November, which is the UN International Day for the Prevention and Fight Against All Forms of Transnational Organised Crime. But enough of introductions, let's get started. We have a short video by our Executive Director of the Global Initiative, Mark Shaw, who will set the stage for the rest of our conversation.
We are at an inflection point. The present moment is defined by a resurgence of authoritarian tendencies, territorial conflicts, environmental degradation, and a new, unpredictable technological revolution. As a result, organized crime is not merely expanding, it is reorganizing. When we first launched the Global Organized Crime Index back in 2021, we set out to capture organized crime and resilience in 193 countries, something which had never been done before. And then in 2023, we expanded the tool scope by adding more criminality indicators to capture emerging and evolving dynamics. And now with the launch of the index in 2025, we have 5 years of data. We can use that data to identify patterns and trends and analyze the evolution of organized crime over the recent past. Global shifts, which once unfolded over decades, are now occurring within just a few years. Criminal actors are not just only adapting, in many cases, they are profiting from these changes. At the same time, responses are much slower and often disjointed. At this juncture, Which road should we take? I encourage you to use the index as a tool to interrogate different policy options, to build resilience against organized crime, and to work together to reduce the harms that it causes to societies around the world.
Since we first published the index, our dedicated award-winning website has had nearly 2 million unique visitors from around the world and has been quoted in the media thousands of times as a source of reliable evidence and comparison on the state of the global criminal economy. It is used by governments to design their programs and evaluate their impact, and by public officials, researchers, and businesses to understand the environment in which they work. But you don't have to believe me about that. Let's hear it from some users themselves.
No hay hoy una herramienta similar que nos permita entender las dinámicas de los mercados ilegales.
Findings from the latest edition of the index have appeared in news stories around the world, from Asia to the Americas. But beyond the headlines, they also continue to inform research, shape analysis, and support the development of key quantitative tools.
When you have an index of such nature, you can connect the dots and see where you apply preventive measures so that you reduce occurrences.
The Organized Crime Index is a very attractive tool in education. It can not only educate students on complex social phenomena like organized crime, but it can also raise awareness.
Un éxito, hemos aprendido mucho y vamos fortaleciendo las redes de resiliencia para la democracia en la región.
The index enables us to better understand criminal trends, identify vulnerabilities, and assess the effectiveness of our institutional responses.
The index's impact is clear. We've received many messages from various organizations, businesses, and others who draw on data in their daily work. It's shaping action. It helps guide real-world policies, influence strategies, and support frontline responses to complex criminal threats. With this new dataset, we aim to continue fulfilling this important role, bringing greater clarity to an ever-evolving global landscape.
Our index provides a unique X-ray of organized crime in all 193 UN member states. It analyzes 15 criminal markets and 5 types of criminal actor. It also assesses states' resilience through 12 pillars of an optimal and holistic state response. The index takes us 2 full years to develop, with 6,176 input indicators, more than 300 independent expert contributors, and multiple layers of verification. So with no further ado, let's turn to the main findings of the 2025 Global Organized Crime Index, which will be presented by my colleague, Laura Adal, Director of the Index team. For everybody watching online, please don't hesitate to put your questions into the Q&A boxes, and they'll be answered live by other members of our Index team who are online ready and waiting to respond. Laura, over to you.
Thank you, Tuesday. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be presenting to you the findings from the 2025 Global Organized Crime Index. The results that I'll be going over today are very much a high-level overview and really represent only a small portion of the index data. So please keep in mind that the dynamics that I'll be discussing may be different depending on the geographic, thematic, or temporal parameters that you as users may set when using the index. And so I encourage everyone to check out the interactive index platform, ocindex.net, to explore the different ways that the results can be analyzed. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so to start off, I'd like to first give you the big picture. With expert contributions, we now have 3 editions and are able to see how criminality and resilience interact over time. So on the slide here, you can see global criminality in red versus resilience in blue for the 2021, 23, and 25 editions. Now, at first glance, it may not look like much is happening, but keeping in mind, of course, the complexity of the global criminal landscape, and if we were to zoom in, You can see very clearly now how criminality over the years has continued to grow as resilience consistently remains insufficient to tackle the criminal threats that we all face. And while global resilience has remained more or less stagnant between 2021 and 2023, the data in fact now shows that in 2025, resilience is actually on the decline. So having said that, let's start off by delving into criminality first by looking at criminal markets as one of the two parts that make up countries' criminality scores. All right, so the index measures every criminal market, criminal actor, and resilience indicator on a scale of 1 to 10. But it's important to remember here that these scales are reversed for criminality and for resilience. So for example, a score of 1 in the context of a criminal market, for example, signifies the most desirable scenario because it indicates the absence of that criminal market. While for resilience, a score of 1 represents the least desirable scenario because it indicates, of course, the absence of that resilience measure. Now, having said that, and in looking at the 15 criminal markets that the index measures, we see that for a second year in a row, right over here, financial crimes were identified as the most pervasive criminal market worldwide, with a score of 6.21 out of 10. And in a way, this makes sense because the market, as the index defines it, encompasses just a range of illicit activities. So anything from financial fraud to embezzlement and so on. And so the presence of this market really can be found in every jurisdiction. Now, following that same logic, we can see right over here, human trafficking comes in second, again, also covering a range of exploitative activities, so anything from forced labor to sex trafficking and the like. This is then followed by human smuggling, arms trafficking, the cannabis trade, and so on. On the other end of the spectrum, we can see flora crimes, extortion and protection racketeering, and the heroin trades identified as the least pervasive criminal markets worldwide. All right, now in looking at how these criminal markets have shifted over time, you can see here that not only were financial crimes identified as the most pervasive in 2025, but were also noted as experiencing the largest increase over the past 2 years with a rise of 0.24 points. This was then followed by the synthetic drug trade, trade in counterfeits, human trafficking, and so on. If you notice to the right of the slide, we see that the results show that actually 5 criminal markets declined in 2025, and that includes arms trafficking, albeit very, very marginally, flora crimes, extortion, the cannabis trade, and the heroin trade. And in the coming slides, I'll be delving a little bit deeper into some of the key markets. But again, here, just to give you a broad overview of how illicit markets have evolved over time. All right, so as an example, here we turn to the drug markets. And as you can see, the 2025 index finds that the cannabis trade remains, for a third year in a row now, the most pervasive of the 4 drug markets, with a 2025 score of a 5.19 out of 10. This is then followed by the synthetic drug trade right over here, cocaine, and then finally the heroin trade, which falls far behind the other drug economies. Now, again, here we see how the 4 drug markets have shifted over the years. While, as I mentioned, the cannabis trade remains the most pervasive, the data now shows that actually this market has witnessed a decline over the past 2 years. And this is likely not necessarily reflective of the decline in supply or use per se, but rather a trend of decriminalization of the drug in various jurisdictions, and therefore falling outside of the scope of the index. Actually, what's interesting here is that the index finds that the synthetic drug trade, which comes in second of the 4 drug markets, actually saw the highest jump since 2021. And that is actually more than any other criminal market, drugs or otherwise. We also see right over here that cocaine increased as well. And this is actually one of the major findings that you'll find in the report. The data shows that just how shifts in the in drug markets are transforming the global drug economy into, let's say, a duopoly. So essentially centering around 2 major drug types. All right, so now I just want to take a step back and look at some other shifts in criminal markets that the index report delves into, particularly how criminal markets that often tend to be nonviolent are having some major impacts on society and how the responses to deal with them are being shaped. So here on the slide, we have two correlation charts. So one for resilience and financial crimes, and another one for resilience and cyber-dependent crimes. Again, two markets that are not necessarily inherently violent, but nonetheless, we all know can wreak havoc on society. And what's interesting to see here is that under the index, both criminal markets were shown to have very low correlations with resilience. So in other words, whether countries have high or low resilience is not necessarily going to make an impact on these criminal markets. And of course, this is troubling because, as I already mentioned, for financial crimes, it's the fastest growing and most pervasive market. But even with cyber-dependent crimes, while it's not even close to the top of the list, the 2025 index found that this market increased in 18 out of 22 regions globally. And that is more than any other criminal market. And so to put it in another way, as the data currently stands, resilience efforts, at least on a global scale, are simply not equipped to deal with these criminal threats. All right, just delving into one more point on criminal markets, I wanted to highlight the trade in counterfeit goods, which so often tends to be overlooked. Many consider this to be a harmless crime, but beyond the fact that the market continues to grow, that it covers a range of products, so anything from everyday goods to medicines, what the data shows here is actually that the counterfeit trade is also a pretty good indicator of the presence of other criminal markets. And so you can see on the slide here, high correlation was found between counterfeits and the overall criminal markets average. And in a way that also makes sense. The drivers of this pattern are rooted within a broader context of economic instability, a decline in consumer purchasing power, and of course, heightened policy uncertainty. And in these conditions, of course, people may turn to cheap fake goods while also finding alternative sources of income that much more attractive in the face of financial hardship or instability. And so again, all of these conditions are just reinforcing that cycle in which organized crime thrives. All right, so now I'll turn to the second component that makes up overall criminality, that is criminal actors as the perpetrators of organized crime. So looking at the 5 criminal actor types that the index covers, since 2021, the index continues to find that state-embedded actors, right over here, that is, actors that are acting from within the state apparatus, are the dominant criminal actor type globally. And I'll come back to the implications of this later on in the presentation. This was then followed by foreign criminal actors, criminal networks, the private sector, and then, of course, mafia-style groups right over here, which sits well below the global average of a 5.25 out of 10. Now, looking more closely at how criminal actors have evolved, here we can see that 4 out of the 5 actor types registered an increase in their influence and pervasiveness, with mafia-style groups right over here recording the only decline. Now, at first glance, these results might seem off, might seem odd, but given that drug cartels and other armed groups that we typically classify as mafia-style groups have been dominating the headlines. So if we were to take a step back and look at all of the indicators, we can see that foreign criminal actors, right over here, has increased the most since the previous edition, and that this also might be linked to the decline in mafia-style groups. So throughout the index development, expert noted a growing pragmatism among criminal groups who are more willing to work with one another and expand their reach into different geographies. And so under the index, mafia-style groups, as they strengthen their influence and move into new territories, the index picks that up and then reclassifies them as foreign criminal actors in those countries. All right, now we'll turn to resilience as the other side of the coin. So here we have the 12 resilience indicators, and we can see that right over here, international cooperation remains the strongest resilience measure globally, followed by national policies and laws, territorial integrity, law enforcement, and so on. On the other end of the spectrum, we can see indicators like non-state actors, prevention, government transparency, and victim and witness support. And so in looking at the slide here, by and large, on a global level, what the data shows here is that there's a tendency by states to rely on more institutional or quote unquote harder measures to respond to organized crime rather than those that are rooted in other spheres of society, like, let's say, social cohesion. That said, the 2025 index shows some interesting results when it comes to the evolution of resilience. So first, looking at the slide here, a whopping 9 out of 12 resilience indicators were shown to have declined over the past 2 years, with only prevention, international cooperation, and victim and witness support recording improvements, albeit very, very marginal ones. What's more is that if we look at international cooperation, while it did increase in 2025, this growth was the smallest increase for that measure since the first edition of the index back in 2021. So only again here rising by 0.02 points. To put it another way, international cooperation is slowing down. And here I think it's reflective of our world today, right? With a growing distrust in multilateralism and cooperation on many things, but having that extend, of course, also to collaboration in the fight against organized crime. And just one more final point to make here. I just want to point out judicial system and detention. It was shown to have the largest decline since 2023. In fact, this decline is compounded by its strong correlation with state-embedded actors. In other words, where state-embedded actors are high, judicial system scores tend to be low. And this, again, is particularly troubling because the judiciary is essentially the final stop in the criminal justice chain. It is what determines what is and isn't organized crime, and then, of course, applies the penalties. Similarly, if we were to look at detention systems, when those are not properly administered, they themselves can become extensions of criminality. Essentially, this is the indicator that forms the basis of accountability in our society. And so what the data here is saying, it's really a warning sign that of how, when state and capture and institutional weaknesses converge, it can erode a critical pillar of resilience. All right, so thus far I've been speaking about criminality and resilience from a thematic perspective, and now I just want to shift gears and talk about these dynamics through a geographic lens. And I'd like to first start off by saying that when it comes to looking at the results geographically, because of the way that the index calculates the scores for criminality and for resilience, we take a simple average of the relevant indicators to come up with overall scores. What ends up happening is that geographies that have more diverse criminal markets, for example, will end up having higher scores than those that may have just one or two extremely pervasive market. All right, so having said that and starting with continental comparisons, if you look to the left, right over here under criminality, you can see that continental rankings have remained the same since the 2021 edition. Asia continues to top the list with the highest overall criminality at a 5.52 out of 10. And this is likely due to its sheer size and, again, diversity of criminal activities that take place across the continent. This was then followed by Africa, the Americas, Europe, and Oceania. Now over to the right here for resilience. Again, continental rankings have remained consistent over the years, with Europe registering the highest resilience globally at a 6.28 out of 10, followed by Oceania, the Americas, Asia, and Africa. Now, if we were to break down the results by region, we see that the highest scoring regions globally are in the Americas, with Central America at the top of the list for actually the third year in a row now. This was followed by South America, which has increased its criminality, now overtaking Western Asia. The highest region in Africa in terms of criminality is East Africa by a relatively wide margin. And then we see a similar dynamic in Europe, with Central and Eastern Europe right over here being sort of a standout region, averaging much higher for criminality than other parts of that continent. Now, again, we can break down the data even further by country, and here we see the top 15 countries globally for criminality. So first, when looking at the rankings here, what's important to remember is that the index assigns country scores based on the criminality dynamics that are occurring within their national boundaries. So for example, if our country was known to export organized crime abroad, those criminal dynamics would then be captured in the countries that were subsequently impacted. And so what this does, it really presents an opportunity for users to delve beyond the index scores and research and analyze the direction of criminal flows. And so looking at the slide here, we see right over here to the left, Myanmar tops the list for a second year in a row now. This is then followed by a number of countries in the Americas. The DRC has the highest score for Africa, followed then by South Africa, reflective again of the diversity of how criminality manifests in the country. Now, in any case, while criminality dynamics are of course dependent on each country's context, one commonality that we can pull from the data is that for the vast majority of these countries, they've experienced some sort of conflict or instability. And of course, we know that these are the conditions that exacerbate vulnerability to organized crime. All right, so what we have on the slide here is something that we call a vulnerability matrix. So if you look to the top, the x-axis represents criminality, the y is resilience. They form 4 quadrants with a midway point of 5.5 out of 10. So starting with that bottom left beige quadrant, this is where countries with low criminality and low resilience would be placed. And actually here we see the majority of countries in the world, 72 of them in fact, fall into this category. Now, right next to it in red, right over here, this is where countries that are in the most dire situation placed. And so here we see 66 countries classified as having high criminality, but low resilience. Now, if we were to take these 2 bottom quadrants together, we see that blue shadow covering both, showing that overall 66.4% of the global population live in countries with low resilience. So again, countries with resilience scores below a 5.5 out of 10 mark. Now moving up to that top left green quadrant right over here, this is where countries would want to be. And so we see 46 countries fall into that low crime, high resilience category. And then finally, over to the right, that small peach-colored quadrant, only 9 countries in the world fall into this high criminality, but also high resilience category. And so if we were to take that small peach-colored quadrant along with that bottom red one, we can see that red shadow covering both, showing that a whopping 82.7% of the global population live in countries with high criminality. Finally, I just want to show how these quadrants have changed over time since the index first began. And you can actually see the dotted lines showing what these categories look like back in 2021. So more countries have moved over to that red quadrant of high crime and low resilience. In other words, the ideal quadrant got smaller, the most serious quadrant got larger. All right, so moving on to a new analysis that we've introduced for the first time in 2025. So the index plays a dual role in that it provides a snapshot of how organized crime and resilience looks today, but also how they evolve over time. To that end, the index, which of course now has 3 sets of data, has piloted a forecasting analysis that projects criminality trends over the next 5 years, so by 2029. Assuming, of course, that external conditions remain stable. In other words, we're not going to endure another global pandemic or major war or so on. And this forecasting model builds on the vulnerability matrix, which you can see here again, with each dot representing one of the 193 UN member states. And over time, we can see how these countries move across the matrix, with many countries positioned really right on the verge of moving into another quadrant. In other words, countries that are truly at a crossroads, so to speak. And so ideally, countries aim to reach that low criminality, high resilience quadrant right over here, which is considered the ideal place to be, or what we refer to, at least in these circumstances, the quote unquote safe zone. So we identified 21 countries that, regardless of their position on the matrix, have the shortest distance to reach that quote unquote safe zone. And we use these countries as a sample for the pilot forecasting model. And so what the results show is that if conditions remain unchanged, 7 of the 21 countries, although so close to moving into that ideal quadrant, are likely to experience an increase in criminality in the next 5 years. And you can see those countries are marked with an asterisk on the slide. The remaining countries would see only very, very marginal improvements. Now, despite these results, we understand, of course, that the future is not fixed. Countries actually do have the power to change their trajectories. And so a complementary analysis was run to explore what countries can do to improve their criminality and resilience situations and hopefully reach that safe zone. Now, the problem here is that the relationship between criminality and resilience is not straightforward. In fact, the data shows that these two dynamics are only moderately correlated. And so we turned to something else to be used as a proxy for criminality, and that was state-embedded actors. So a key finding of the index is that state-embedded actors are not only the most influential criminal actor type, but also that this was the criminality indicator that shows the strongest negative correlation with resilience. This means that these actors are the primary obstacle to effective resilience. So where state-embedded actors were high, resilience tends to be low, and vice versa. And so the statistical analysis showed that by increasing resilience by 1 full point, this corresponds to a 1.8 reduction in state-embedded actors. Now, at the same time, state-embedded actors were also found to affect the scope and scale of criminal markets, with the analysis there indicating that a full point decrease in state-embedded actors is associated with a 0.14 decline in the average criminal market score. So, in other words, the interconnectedness between criminality and resilience could really be understood as a chain reaction. So a significant increase in a country's resilience reduces the influence of state-embedded actors, which in turn leads to a decline in criminal markets. So having realized that through the data, how can countries improve their resilience in order to trigger this chain reaction? Keeping in mind, of course, that each country's context is very specific. There really is no one size fits all when it comes to resilience. The index finds that actually each resilience indicator has a different level of impact on the presence of state-embedded actors. More specifically, 8 out of the 12 resilience indicators show a significant and statistically direct influence on the presence of state-embedded actors. And you can actually see those on the slide here. Now, that's not to say that the remaining 4 indicators are less important. Actually, it's to the contrary. Their role really lies in reinforcing broader resilience environments rather than standalone drivers against state-embedded actors. Actually, if we look at areas that are not on the screen, things like law enforcement, non-state actors, there, the infiltration of state criminality tends to undermine their independence. And so it's not surprising that their direct impact is not as pronounced. And so what this pilot analysis shows is that although major leaps in resilience are uncommon and likely to be unrealistic, at least in the short term, targeted reforms in specific areas of resilience can actually produce meaningful and lasting results. Finally, I just want to conclude by summarizing the key findings of this year's index. So first, global drug markets are shifting towards a duopoly, again, increasingly centering around the cocaine and synthetic drug trades. Second, nonviolent forms of crime are on the rise, and resilience currently is ill-equipped to tackle them. Counterfeits are gaining ground and can be thought of as both a symptom and a driver of criminality amid a global economy that's struggling. Fourth, foreign actors are expanding their influence. And there's a rising pressure on both institutional and non-state sources of resilience. And then finally, small changes in key areas of resilience have been shown to have a marked impact on the presence and reduction of state-embedded actors. And so with that, I'll stop here. But again, I would like to encourage everyone to check out the index report in digital format on ocindex.net, where you can read the findings, but also, of course, explore all of the data on the interactive platform. So with that, I thank you again, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Laura, for that presentation. It is obviously a challenge to cover so much content and such detailed results in a summary, but we thank you for giving us the most important highlights. I promised you in the introduction that we had distinguished panelists, and we do have distinguished panelists. So we are going to spend the next 20 minutes of the launch to have a conversation with some really leading thinkers and responders, giving us a chance to reflect more on some of the implications of this edition's findings. All of our 3 distinguished guests who will come online now are members of our global initiative network of experts, and we are incredibly privileged to be able to invite them here to join us today. Our 3 panelists are Jürgen Stock, former Secretary General of Interpol and Vice President of Germany's Bundeskriminalamt; Martha Machado, the National Secretary in the Ministry of Justice and Public Security for the Government of Brazil; and John Gitongo, a prominent independent journalist and anti-corruption activist from Kenya. Hello, folks. Thank you for being with us today. We're super grateful. I'd like to, if I may, turn the first question to Mr. Stock. You led Interpol, the international police organization, for a decade. How do you feel organized crime as an issue has changed over that period? And do you think that the index, which we've been publishing since 2019 for Africa and 2021 globally, captures those changes?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tuesday, and I'm glad to be in this lounge. I think as somebody who has been joining the global initiative from its very beginning, my congratulations to all those who have been conducting this important piece of research, and also my congratulations to those who have been sponsoring, because we know there's always a problem with money and financial support if it comes to research in organized crime. So very briefly, I think a very much needed piece of information. And Laura, thanks for your presentation. It's really, I made a lot of notes while you were presenting some of the key findings. I'm a deep fan of, let's say, evidence-based criminal justice policy. And a problem we are having, and a problem, and I apologize for still saying we, I'm no longer in Interpol, but I still say we have been in law enforcement, is that we are lacking sufficient information. We tend to focus on a single investigation. We tend to focus on a single success story. But we are very often, and we also includes the political level, we are looking behind the single case and trying to capture the bigger picture. And of course, we know also from Interpol research and the activities of the global initiative that organized crime, despite all success stories of international police cooperation, judicial cooperation, is becoming more international, more global, more complex, more influential, and more dangerous. And we have been conducting a study in Interpol which actually matches perfectly with the results that Laura just presented. And I hope there will be many more meetings in the near future where we bring all these pieces of research together to have a much better understanding about the patterns, the trends, the volume of organized crime, which currently, I would say, in all parts of the world is only insufficiently being available. And of course, evidence, information about trends and patterns and volume are the very much needed basis for targeted operations with very limited resources. So in a nutshell, again, congratulations, very interesting findings. Again, we are in a phases where, again, organized crime is on the rise, no doubt about that. I think that's also been supported by your research. We have limited resources available. I very much appreciate that international cooperation is very high on the score, but of course we know it's not the only tool available. It would require the so-called holistic whole of the government approach. But again, and that also makes the global initiative so important. No country, no region, even no group of like-minded states can fight organized crime in isolation. And having data available now through your initiative, the Organized Crime Index allows for a much better assessment and something that indeed I would call evidence-based criminal justice policy. So congratulations, and hopefully there will be many more fora where the findings can be discussed with all kinds of those actors who would try to push organized crime back. Thank you.
Thank you, Jürgen. And I feel like it would be remiss not to say that Mr. Stock was one of the founding members of the GI back when we were just a twinkle in a group of law enforcement officials' eye some 14 years ago. So we hope that through the index, we have fulfilled a little bit of the vision that you had for Thank you very, very much. Ms. Machado, would you mind if I turn to you next? You've led government policy setting on some key organized crime issues in the government of Brazil, including finding whole of government responses to drug markets, which is, of course, a huge challenge. Could you tell us what, if anything, to be fair, the index could contribute to this process?
Well, thank you so much for being part of this panel. I think I would like to start congratulating GI-TOC. I totally agree with Mr. Stock that the index is amazingly, it's impressive. It's an impressive work. It shows the complexity of the problem, how the dynamics, how organized crime is constantly changing, and that makes it brings a lot of challenges for us who are in the state. So having bringing data on this dimension, on this complexity, on this dynamic and this dynamic, so complex dynamic of organized crime, it's really useful not only for researchers but also for lawmakers and decision makers. We are also normally all immersed in our national landscape, and it's important to bring that dimension, the transnationality of illicit organized crimes network, and how all our responses also has to be connected. That's also how it's notable how you mention international cooperation as a key aspect of how we can broaden our resilience. I think the index and the ideas that you presented reinforces some of the dimensions of our work in Brazil. I think the first one, it's of course evidence-based public policies, which is not simple in an era of penal populism. So it's really a relief to bring diagnosis, data, and way forward based on evidence and not only on easy responses. We are also very aware about the need, and I think the discussion of the index reinforces that, to improve law enforcement, making it more targeted, making it more intelligent and effective against organized crime. And here, again, we have a pattern of incarcerating people, of incarcerating vulnerable individuals, vis-a-vis focusing on economic or financial asphyxiation of organized crime. This is a strong effort that we are doing here in Brazil. How can we change the pattern of a country that has traditionally focused on incarcerating individuals and now has to develop? So this is our struggle in the federal government to strengthen and develop more and more intelligence, long investigations that really get to the financial institutions, to financial crimes, to money laundering, and to more powerful scale into organized crime. We launched a very broad research here by our secretary, together with the Brazilian Institute of Applied Economic Research, that served more than 5,000 drug traffic. And it revealed this worrying scenario, both in terms of selective law enforcement, but also in terms of limited impact in criminal organizations, because the vast majority of defendants were first-time offenders, young, with low levels of education, no clear connection or no strong connection with organized organizations, were arrested mostly without weapons, and most of the cases, 84% of the cases, were resulted only for flagrant arrests in the streets, were not a result of long-standing investigations that can really tackle the financial heart of organizations. So I think the index reinforces this issue that we have been very vocal on the federal government, that we really need to focus on financially asphyxiating organized crime. And I think that when you bring the complexity of the resilience factors, it's also it's very important. That's a very important issue, because we also tend, like normally, and also when you have when you live in a country with strong problems of public security that affect citizens every day, there is a tendency to go for easy solutions. And when you see this dimension of how many factors are important to bring resilience, and that we need to go broader, and we need to go beyond only repressive and incarceration, I think that also empowers complex solution and more effective solutions. So that's my first reaction. I don't know if I'll have more time later.
Thank you so much, Ms. Machado. That was a very thoughtful set of answers, which really, I think, highlight the complexity and the scale of the challenges that some countries are dealing with and their spillover effects into broader regions. Super, super useful opening comments. Thank you. John, if I may, thank you so much for being with us today. You heard in Laura's comments in the presentation that state-embedded actors have consistently been the most pernicious form of criminal actor in every edition of the index that we've had. And now that the analysis shows that addressing them as a threat could have the most impact in improving countries' positions on our vulnerability matrix. Does that gel with what you see in your understanding? And what do you think needs to be done as a result?
Sorry. First of all, thank you very much. And like my colleagues, I'd like to congratulate Global Initiative for Transactional Crime for this very rich and insightful report once again. Absolutely, the state-embedded actors have always emerged as the most pernicious when it comes to organized crime. And I think that hasn't changed. And if one looks across Africa, the territory that I am involved in, over the past 8-9 years, we've seen a range of countries endure major upsets and youth, almost rebellions and revolts on the ground, often against leaders who have stayed in power for too long, very corrupt elites, a lack of accountability in public service, and a deterioration of democratic circumstances. And this, we've seen a whole range of coups across the Sahel, plus very, very powerful demonstrations and uprisings by young people across Africa. And when one listens to them, their the most consistent issue that they raise is the issue around corruption, especially the corruption amongst leaders and those who hold discretionary power in their societies. This is often accompanied by conspicuous consumption that fuels this outrage. And what's been fascinating for me over the years is that when we think of these embedded actors, we think of our politicians, some of them who've been in office for decades and very corrupt and sitting at the top of very rotten administrations. The truth is, these networks include, and now more than ever, security actors, people in the military, people in the intelligence services, and very importantly, people in the legal services who are enablers to this. And so these networks are the backbone of the resilience of the most corrupt networks across most of Africa. And we're going to see more and more activism in their regard over the coming months as elections take place or don't take place in some countries.
Thanks, John, and thanks for highlighting really the role of youth and hopefully the change agents that they'll become as we move into future elections, future leadership, and more change. Marta, since we still have time, I would love to come back to you. You mentioned a couple of times points around the importance of the judicial system and the penitentiary system, which of course is important and has been quite a strategic and I think an issue of tension in Latin America. If you were going to put out a finding and a recommendation, what would it be?
Yeah, I think to look at I think the judiciary is a very important actor in this context. First, changing the mind to focus on more complex investigation and getting to the patrimony and financial and really affecting organizations financially, as I mentioned. But second, I think the index also raised awareness that disproportionate and no strategic penal responses may increase state vulnerability. And Brazil is a striking case, an example of this dynamic. As you know, Brazil has currently the third largest prison population in the world, with over 900,000 people incarcerated, and 1/3 of that population are imprisoned for drug-related offenses, and it's a very dire situation. The Brazilian Supreme Court has already declared that prison overcrowding and the systematic violations of human rights inside the Brazilian penitentiary system is a huge problem. It was declared as a state of unconstitutional affairs. And it's also, although we had this huge social problem with the penitentiary system, we cannot it had not influenced in the disruption of organized crime. On the contrary, organized crime has been operating through the penitentiary system. And even worse, we are recruiting people for the organized crime, because as we are incarcerating vulnerable individuals that sometimes are arrested for the first time, as they enter the penitentiary system, where we really have a strong presence of criminal organizations, they are immediately recruited by one of them. So I think there is a call. I think all the evidence you bring, it's a call to action, a call to reflection and to action. So we look at the repressive tools and look at the penitentiary system with caution, just not to focus only on that, and also consider the other dimensions that make resilience more structural. I think that prevention, public health, social protection of communities that are all the time pressed by the organized crime, recruitment of young people. So if you're not combining all those factors, that we will have a huge problem. I just end mentioning one of our priorities here is to combine repressive tools with alternative development tools. So this is what we are doing when you're looking for a region like the Amazon, for example, where you really see the advance of organized crime and the convergence of crime in the region, and especially when you see a region so big with so many challenges in terms of fiscalization, you see that it's important to also protect communities and enhance the resilience of communities. So we are also working and prioritizing this combination or this complementarity between repression, but also alternative development initiatives, so strengthening the resilience of the communities so we can protect them. They don't collaborate with the organized crime, they collaborate with the state.
Thank you, Ms. Machado. I really appreciate you emphasizing the importance of a holistic response and a balance between more enforcement-led security-based responses and alternative development. I think that's really important. And I'm sure my colleagues also enjoyed the fact that you described the index as a call for reflection and a call for action. I think that is a really nice turn of phrase that we will all take away with us. John, can I come back to you? To contrast one region to another, I think East Africa, Laura described, has been the highest African sub-region for criminality, and by a significant measure when you compare it across the rest of the continent. What would you pick out as being the most important things needed to turn this around?
I think that, I am East African, so whenever I see that kind of statistic, I'm a bit surprised. I would like to think that there are other parts of the continent which have the same problem. This is a very open part of Africa. We have the coasts along coast, eastern coast, Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania all have coasts that are very busy and have long relationships with the rest of the world. And I would say here, more than any other part of Africa, all the investment that can be made in consolidating systems of accountability when it comes to the way governance is carried out. It's extremely important to sort of diminish this powerful negative impact that especially political actors and security actors have in terms of promoting criminality. And to the extent that cooperation can be deepened, the multiplier effect of just sharing of information, cooperating around conflict, crime investigations, and improving resilience is extremely high. I think, as the report finds, is one of the highest of all the different initiatives that can be taken. So East Africa is a historically very open part of Africa. So I'd like to say I'm surprised that this is where it comes out in terms of criminality, but actually no.
Thanks, John. Really a nice segue for us to the final question which we had, which was emphasizing the importance, I think, of some of the regional cooperation and the challenges of dealing with integrated regions when you're talking about transnational threats. It's a perfect way to offer our last round of remarks to Jürgen, since you have sat for a long time with experience in both in national policing, but in international police cooperation. It would be interesting to hear your reflections on really what we need to see in terms of law enforcement cooperation. And if I may just push you slightly, Laura's presentation really pithily noted that financial and economic crime plus cyber-enabled crimes are the fastest growing forms of criminal markets, and that we don't seem well placed to respond. As a lot of the Q&A questions have indicated too, this is an area of concern for our audience. What do you think we need to put in place in terms of the law enforcement community to make a dent in this area?
Yeah, I mean, in light, again, I apologize that I need to leave in 1.5 minutes for the next call. But again, law enforcement work, police work is only one pillar in fighting organized crime, and perhaps it's not the most important one. As Marta already said, what we would need, again, in an ideal world, is a comprehensive strategy, a strategy with which we could operationalize all the activities that need to be conducted. So based on data, of course, from law enforcement, but data also from research, up to date and new research like the index, but also research that has been conducted in the past, because it's actually not rocket science. We already have a lot of knowledge and findings from previous research that has been conducted. We need, again, I repeat that, a whole of society approach, and we need, of course, international cooperation at all levels that starts with information sharing, communication, collaboration, and of course, coordination of the activities. The blueprint that it can work for me is the global initiative against Daesh, where we have seen countries, international organizations coming together, coordinating their activities at various levels and pushing a complex threat back. This perhaps is a blueprint also for the international fight against organized crime, which is very much needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your time, sharing your expertise and your insights with us on this launch. We do consult with you all often and in many other ways, but it is really nice to have you here standing with us as we launch the index and to offer your insights to all of our audience. So very, very many thanks to Marta, to John, and to Jürgen. We wish you a superb afternoon. We are about to now close the panel, but before we go, I wanted to give you an idea of some of the next steps coming up concerning the index, because really the report and the presentation of findings are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of all of the contributions that the index makes, both to our work and hopefully to yours. As I mentioned in the opening, the launch is a kickoff to generate interest, but we will have a number more substantive engagements around the world going forward. The first is a Asia launch, joint with the United Nations University in Tokyo, where our Executive Director, Mark Shaw, is on his way to. That is a reflection, again, of the importance of Asia in discussions around criminal markets. On November 14th, we will be generating publicity around the index to correspond with the UN Day Against Transnational Organized Crime. A week from today, on November 17th, we'll be launching the ENACT Index, which is the Africa version of the Organized Crime Index. For those of you who have known us a long time, we did actually do the first index in 2019 just for Africa, which was a pilot and EU funded. So this one will then be offering its 5th iteration, which is very exciting. But we're still not done. A week after that, we will launch our illegal, unreported and unregulated, so IUU fishing index for 2025. This is also a direct product born out of the formative stages of the Global Organized Crime Index, as its methodology was proposed by our experts at Poseidon, and we thought it was so cool, so interesting that we would produce that too. And I know that that has offered a lot of benefit to communities against environmental harms and maritime protection. And then after that, over the coming months, starting in January, we will be doing a series of regional studies that go into more detail on criminal markets and actors in a variety of regions, as well as finding ways to offer in-person events and engagements that are region-specific in different parts of the world. So this is very much just the beginning of our journey and our story, and I hope that we will find many ways to engage with all of you going forward. We are going to begin to close, so I say one last big thank you to our panel members. Thank you to Laura and her team, who are now getting a 15-minute coffee break, and then we'll have to begin preparing the data collection for the next round of the index, which will come out in 2 years' time. So there is no rest whatsoever for these poor souls. And finally, a big thank you to so many people who joined us for the launch, so many people who share in our work. The index has been a collaborative effort. We innovate based upon your requests, so please do send in comments, questions, suggestions, anything that might have been sparked by this event and by your exploration of our data. As we sign off, we'll be leaving you with a video that will give you a tour around our award-winning website, which we make with Cafe Arts Brazil, a fantastic design company. And it will show you all the resources that we have online, which includes all of the original data, tools to analyze it, methodology papers that answer some of the background questions that people have been putting up. So it really is a treasure trove of data and information, and we encourage you to dig deep into it. So on behalf of the GI, thanks to everyone, thanks to you all, and we hope to hear from you soon.
The Global Organised Crime Index, ocindex.net. It's an interactive hub that visualizes organised crime activity and societal resilience around the world. Pick the parameters that matter to you and dive into the data from temporal, thematic, or geographic angles. We've built the platform together with its users, so if you have a feature idea, let us know. We love hearing from you. Interactive Map. When the site loads, you're greeted by an interactive map that defaults to the criminality score. In the lower left corner, you'll see the current global criminality rating, plus a small indicator that shows whether the worldwide level has risen since the last index edition. Hover over any country to reveal its score, global rank, and regional rank. A compact graph beneath the map displays that country's criminality trend across previous index releases. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Click the View Full Profile link to open the detailed country summary. Country summaries. Each country summary is split into two panels. The left panel is criminality and it's in red. Tap the plus widget to expand a breakdown of the overall score into the 15 criminal markets and 5 criminal actor types. On the right is resilience, and that's in blue. Here you can drill down into the 15 resilience pillars and see the score for each indicator. Scrolling further, you'll find contextual analysis that ties the indicators together, covering both crime and resilience aspects. Summaries can be viewed online, downloaded as PDFs, and a selection are available in multiple languages. You can also switch between past editions of a country's profile via the drop-down menu at the top center of the screen. There are 193 country summaries in total. Comparison tools. Back on the main map, you have several ways to compare data. The change indicator at the top left, where you can choose a criminal market, actor type, or resilience pillar. The map recolors with darker shades indicating higher scores. Or you can compare heat maps, top right. Activate a second map, pick another indicator and hover over a country to see both scores side by side. For the third option, you need to be in a country summary, where in the top right you will see compare countries or regions. This lets you put two countries against each other or stack a country against an entire region for a deeper dive. These tools are designed for researchers, policymakers, and anyone needing a clear visual comparison. Rankings, thematic areas, and regions. Open the purple hamburger menu, top right, and select Rankings. You'll see a grid of red pyramids and blue panels displaying country names and scores. Use Order and Filter, top left, to sort by any indicator, adjust score ranges, or switch the view to regions or continents. Switch to the list view via the grey hamburger icon next to the Region tab if you prefer a table format. Choosing thematic areas follows the same steps, but focuses on a single indicator. Each page starts with a brief definition, then shows the highest and lowest scoring nations. Below that, you can view the scores on a map, rank all countries by the chosen metric, or compare the selected indicator with another one. Data Explorer. Access the Data Explorer from the hamburger menu or directly from any thematic area. This is the most powerful part of the site. You can analyze up to 4 variables at once: the core criminality and resilience scores, plus 4 socio-economic indicators and country size. The Data Explorer also pulls in data from 11 external indices, for example, the Corruption Perception Index, Democracy Index, and homicide rates. It's a one-stop shop for spotting cross-dataset patterns and trends. Downloads. In the Downloads section, you'll find the full Global Organised Crime Index reports for 2025, 2023, and 2021, available to read online or download. Further down, the complete dataset is offered as a Microsoft Excel or CSV file, so you can use it in your own analysis. Several partner organizations have built custom interfaces and dashboards that display the data in ways that suit their specific needs or platforms. If you'd like to explore how your organization can work with us, please reach out. In addition to the dataset, the methodology, scoring thresholds, and guidance documents are also available for download. We hope you'll put the OC Index to work in your research, policy development, or advocacy. Keep an eye out for new episodes of the Index podcast on YouTube, plus written analysis, webinars, and deep dive content on key topics. On behalf of the Index team and the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime, Thank you for watching.